Well, it brings me absolutely no joy to say this, but June 2023 came and went. Once again, E3 didn't happen. And for those of us who have attended this event in the past, it appears that we may have done this for the very last time. After years of failing to read the writing on the wall, one of the original premier gaming expos in the entire world, looks like they finally accepted the inevitability of their situation. The Electronic Entertainment Expo is not returning this year, physically, electronically, or in any other form.
The saddest part about this is that there was a flicker of hope that this year would be the year that E3 would return to relevance. After foregoing a physical meeting space since 2019, the event organizers seem to have confidence in a plan to rise from the ashes, starting with a new event coordinator, which is Repop, to provide a much-needed reboot.
A glorious comeback story seemed to be in the making, but E3 2023 was stuck facing the same challenges that they never truly addressed in the wake of E3 2019. All of their former dance partners, Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, politely declined their party invitations, as they no longer needed a stage presence at E3 to gain worldwide awareness of their platforms or their titles.
One by one, major publishers such as Ubisoft and Sega, who had previously expressed interest in attending this year's event, started to kind of cancel last minute. And while the founding body behind E3 is still publicly sharing that they intend to find a solution that will enable a 2024 event of some kind, it seems that the curtain has finally fallen on E3 as we knew it for the final time.
And conducting an unbiased autopsy on the fall of E3 is made even more heartbreaking because of how easy it is to see a path to survival for them. There simply isn't a good reason why this previously annual gaming pilgrimage couldn't succeed in the current environment. Multiple gaming expos are delivering positively received, well-attended events this year, and they face the exact same headwinds as the E3 event organizers. There's even a competing event hosted by previous E3 stalwart Jeff Keighley occurring in the exact same time frame. And it did just fine. So it's possible to do it. The root cause of the failure of E3 is not found in exploring these external environmental factors, because they equally impacted their competitors and didn't shut them down. It's actually in a series of internal decisions that reduced this former industry giant into an irrelevant afterthought.
For the years prior to E3 2019, organizers of the event received constant feedback from both the hardware giants as well as the industry media that the expo was originally designed for that E3 was in need of a reboot. The major studios were finding that the millions of dollars they were spending to participate was not equitable to what they were gaining from the showcase and began exploring alternatives.
And when you have companies like Activision and EA who are no longer demonstrating a presence at the event, journalists were finding even less reasons to attend. Now, rather than find a way to get all their core members back into the fold, E3 decided to go bigger instead of better. But opening the doors to the public only resulted in further backlash, as that event was completely lost sight of everything it was originally designed to do.
For years, E3 was provided with warning after warning that they were losing their most valuable allies and facing extinction. But they failed to listen, deciding to co-spy on their name, recognition, and past glory, while their competitors chose to watch and learn from their mistakes.
And the even more tragic reality about the fall of E3 is that many of us face many of these exact same challenges and follow a similarly flawed pattern of judgment. And there's much to learn from E3's failure if we're willing to do the one thing that they wouldn't do. But to get there, we're going to first need to look at another painfully tragic and unnecessary fall from grace. The very first king of Israel, King Saul. And Saul is one of the most complicated character studies in the entire Bible. This is a man who was handpicked by God to be the very first king of his chosen people.
The beginning of Saul's story reads like an inspirational Hallmark movie.
Without all the snow.
He was a classic underdog born to one of the lowest-ranking families from the smallest tribe in Israel. He wasn't seeking out a life of destiny or fame.
No, this was just an ordinary guy with very little significance other than apparently being tall and handsome. The Bible needed to point that out for us. And at the time, he was performing a pretty unexciting job. He was just looking for some lost donkeys, when his path led him on a collision course with the prophet Samuel. And Samuel changed the entire narrative of Saul's life, bestowing the honor of becoming king on his shoulders. And for a short time, it appeared that Saul would become the hero that Israel had been searching for. He demonstrated ministries of a victorious king. He even prophesied at one point. And much like the incredible rise of E3, Saul's future was looking so bright, he would have wore shades if, they made them back then.
Right people, right place, right time. All systems seem to be coming up green to go. So, what went wrong?
Well, here's what both of these stories have in common. Both Saul and E3 suffered from a terminal state of arrogance that prevented them from learning from their mistakes. They lacked what the Bible calls a teachable spirit. Both of them reached the highest of highs, attaining a plateau that should have allowed them to ride the wave of success that they had inherited. Saul was given the position of head of the table for a country that was called God's chosen people. And E3 had the eyes of the entire world on them, as they were in the favorable position of sharing the biggest announcements in the gaming world, and within the world's fastest growing form of entertainment.
But rather than seek to understand and grow from their mistakes, they chose to double down on them and pursue them to their logical and unfortunate conclusion, and create the opening for those who would go on to replace them.
Saul had the benefit of having access to one of the greatest prophets in the history of the planet as a personal advisor. He'd tell him literally anything he needed to know and what to do, but Saul's rebellious heart prevented him from actually hearing and following Samuel's wisdom over and over again. Saul had opportunities to course correct. While Saul was mindlessly pursuing his future replacement David, because he was trying to murder him, Saul's life was spared on more than one occasion by the very man he was trying to kill. But each time Saul was given a new lease on life, he refused to learn his lesson. He went right back to hunting David. Similarly, E3 was given several warning shots by major publishers like Activision and Sony when they ceased participating in E3 because their repeated requests were not answered by the governing body. E3 slowly died a death by 1,000 cuts, as more and more developers followed suit each year until E3 simply ran out of interested participants.
E3 ignored the bleeding from their own self-inflicted wounds, and if they would have simply listened and learned from the complaints from Activision and Sony when they had a chance, we probably wouldn't be recording this video right now.
Well, we'd be recording a different one. But Saul's final days were just as tragic as they were confusing. As he reached the end, Saul was facing an invasion of the Philistine army that he had no hope of winning. His previous champion, David, the one who slain Goliath and given Israel a critical victory over these exact same Philistines, he had been foolishly chased off by the jealous Saul and took a huge chunk of Saul's military with him. So Saul, trapped in a no-win scenario of his own making, did the unthinkable. He reached out to a witch, a spiritual medium, in a pathetic attempt to speak with the now deceased prophet Samuel. The same advisor that Saul had full access to when he was alive, but had failed to listen to or obey. And in Saul's final bizarre demonstration of lacking a teachable spirit, Saul was given the chilling news that he, as well as his sons, would fall in battle to the Philistines the next day.
And this next question has bothered me for quite some time, I think since we've known each other. If Saul knew that he was destined to die the next day in this last stand with the Philistines, why did he go? Why did he go?
Maybe he didn't have any sick time.
Why didn't he call in sick, use a PTO day, try to make peace with his enemies, or just get on a horse and ride to wherever there weren't Philistines? I don't know. I'm
sure there were places where there were no Philistines.
There had to be.
He had to find some place to be like, well, there's no Philistines here, I won't die today. Why did he still go marching straight forward into a war zone that he knew would not only become his grave, but for his children as well? And the sad answer to that question is the same reason why E3 fell underneath the weight of its own massive hubris, because they had heard and received all of the warnings, but they never actually listened and took them to heart. We all face correction from the Lord as we follow him. This is not an indictment of us as his followers. It's actually proof that we are following him and are his true children. We should crave the continuing interest of the Lord to grow us and bring us closer to him, even though it's typically uncomfortable and unpleasant at the time. He isn't correcting us out of anger, but out of love and a desire to press us towards our best destiny. His guidance will always place us at an unwanted crossroads, and he will send warning after warning on to prevent us from falling to the same fate that awaited both King Saul as well as the E3 event organizers, a warning they refused to listen to even when it came from some very unexpected but trying to be helpful sources.
E3 turned a blind eye to the exodus of every developer who had once depended on them for exposure and a closed ear to the complaints from those who had their best interests at heart. And the people who warned them and could have guided them through this storm are now running more successful annual events in the very shadow of E3's demise.
King Saul also put his fingers in his ears and closed his heart to the guidance from the very Lord who chose him, and Saul's rebellion and arrogance became the catalyst for a man after God's own heart to replace Saul as king. And now the question turns to us. How teachable is our spirit? What area of our lives has the Lord been probing and pushing us to deal with? Will we just keep on moving past it in the hopes that it will somehow solve itself?
What correction has He lovingly given us, but we keep on doing the same thing and praying for a different result?
The Lord is not willing that any of us should perish. That is why He brings others into our path to correct us, guide us, and show us a better way. We'll all get it wrong sometimes. I know I do on a daily basis.
I was about to say.
And it's because of the Lord's incredible grace that He does more than simply cleanse us of our sins. He corrects us so we can avoid the pain of the consequences that even forgiven sins will bring us. So let's not despise the chastening hand of our loving Father. Let's make today the day that we finally get that spiritual check engine light serviced.